Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Trent. I'm a real-world CFI, and in today's video, we're going to do an instrument flying lesson using Microsoft Flight Simulator. And this is a lesson that I did with an actual IFR student of mine in an FAA simulator just this morning, and it's a short hop from an airport by the name of Gooding over to another airport by the name of Twin Falls. We're going to do two approaches in this. We're going to do an RNAV approach into runway 8 at Twin Falls, and then we're going to go missed, and then we're going to do an ILS approach into runway 26. So this video is going to be packed full of instrument training. So if that's something that you're working on either in the real world, because I'm a real world CFII, or it's something you're just trying to become more proficient in Microsoft Flight Simulator, you're definitely going to enjoy today's video. And in a moment, I'm going to show you how to set it all up so you can literally replicate exactly what you're about to watch in your own flight simulator. But first, for those of you who have been really loyal supporters of my channel and have watched my journey from private pilot to airline pilot and been along with me for like a year and a half now, I really want to say thank you very much for continuing to watch all my videos. I do have some cool stuff to share with you. As I mentioned on my Instagram a couple of days ago, I have now been assigned a training class date with SkyWest, which is February 5th. I got an email from them here, and so here's what's coming up, and I'm going to see how much of this I can film or talk about or whatever during the training process. But we've got an ATP CTP that'll happen in Dallas. That's about 10 days long. Then we've got 2 weeks for in-dock training, 2 weeks for ground school, 2 to 3 weeks for simulator training. That should be fun. And then 2 to 3 weeks for IOE, which is short for Initial Operating Experience. So I'm going to be away from home for a lot during that amount of time, so I won't have the setup here, but I might pre-shoot a bunch of content that we'll be able to put on the channel while I'm away, and then while I'm there, it's probably only going to be just shorts and so forth. I'm not really sure how much even free time I'll have while I'm in training, but I'm going to share as much of that. I've read SkyWest social media policy, and I should be able to share a reasonable amount of my experience with you. And I know that in a survey I did recently, you guys are really interested in watching that kind of stuff. So thank you very much for that. So let's dive into it. The first thing you're going to want to do before we set up the flight is go ahead and set up your weather. So I'm going to turn my screen or my camera off now because you don't need to see me anymore. Bye. And now I'm gone. Okay, so go to the gear icon and go and set up your weather. It might not be the gear icon. Hang on, let's go back here. Yeah, the flight conditions right here. So you're going to click this, and the flight conditions you are going to want is not clear skies, is overcast. You're going to want to set it down to around 300 feet, and we'll set tops for this flight anywhere like 4,000 to 5,000 feet. Broken, do we have broken? Yeah, so we want coverage set at 100, and we want density set at 100. Not really going to worry about wind. There wasn't a whole lot of wind today. So once you've done that, save and back, and now you're going to head on over to the map, and you are going to type in KGNG, which is Gooding, and you're going to put yourself on runway 7, and then you're going to go to Kilo Tango Whiskey Foxtrot, which is Twin Falls. It's a very short hop, and then we're going to land initially, well, we're not going to land. We're going to do the approach on runway 8, but we're going to go missed, and then we're going to circle around, and we're going to do the ILS 26. So once you've got that stuff set up, you can go ahead and put your aircraft onto the runway. All right, so once you've got your aircraft on the runway, the first thing that we're going to do is I want to walk you through setting up the autopilot for the departure. Then, because this is such an incredibly short hop, we're going to show you using both the EFB and Foreflight. And unlike my last video where Foreflight was kind of blocking the screen, I'm going to make Foreflight be, let me just set this up, we'll be right back. There we go. So this time I'm going to make Foreflight the same size as the EFB so it's not blocking anything. And then my editor will just zoom in on this as I'm talking about it so that it's bigger on the screen. All right, so what we want to do first is we want to set up the autopilot for the departure. And the reason that this is super important to do when you're taking off into IMC conditions like this is you want to be able to take advantage of that autopilot as soon as you can with the push of a button. You don't want to be twisting a bunch of knobs and doing a bunch of stuff when you're low to the ground climbing out. So let's set it up for 9,500 feet, and we're going to put it in heading mode, and we're going to center the heading bug, and then we're going to hit flight level change to tell the autopilot the airspeed that we want to achieve on the climb, which we'll do at 70 knots. So why do we use flight level change on for climbs? Because if you use vertical speed and say you set vertical speed at 1,000 or 1,200 feet per minute, the autopilot, if the plane is incapable of that rate of climb, the autopilot will literally stall the aircraft, and we don't want that to happen. So the next thing you want to do, your flight plan should have an origin and should have a destination. And we are going to pre-program in the approach. So you're going to hit proc, then you're going to hit select approach, hit enter. Now we don't want the ILS 26 just yet. Let me make this a little higher and get rid of that. Get rid of that so they don't get in the way. So let's zoom in on the MFD, and now we are going to rotate the little FMS knob down to, oops, went past it, RNAV 8 LPV, enter, and we are going to use UME as our initial approach fix. So first of all, I'm going to show you in the EFB how to set this up and know what you should pick for your initial approach fix. And then for you Foreflight users, so let me get rid of Foreflight here so you can see the EFB. So here's what we're going to do. You can see we've got in our flight plan section, we have got Gooding to Twin Falls. That's what we want, but it's got a VFR pattern. So one of the things we're going to want to do is flight rules are going to be IFR, and then we're going to select the transponder. We'll do mode C, squawk plus altitude, and go back to flight details, then click here. Then you're going to want to change this procedure to the RNAV 8 via UME. Okay, so once you've got that done, you can kind of have a look at it. And if you weren't sure, if you're doing this on your own, by the way, and you weren't sure to say, well, how would I know what initial approach fix to choose? Well, here's how you do that. First of all, you're going to click on the destination airport. That is going to then give you this little button here. You would then choose approaches, and you would choose RNAV 8 and choose this. And that's going to get you to be able to see the map. So UME is this fix right here. And we're at an airport that is really not very far from UME. I think it's a little further than this. Our plane's probably up here. But nonetheless, because we're coming from the north, we're headed down, UME is going to be our first fix that we pick. So UME, we're going to hit enter. And then minimums, which we'll talk a lot more about later, is 4350. So, and all this does here when you program this in is it makes the autopilot say minimums, minimums when you get to minimums. And so you just get an auditory reminder that you've hit minimums, which is pretty darn important. So I'm going to pause here real quick so you don't have to watch this. All right, when many rolls of the mouse wheel later, our minimums are now set at 4350. Click enter and then click roll the big FMS knob down to load. Now we're not going to activate this approach yet because we have not been cleared for it. We just want it loaded up in our avionics. Now, same thing for you Foreflight users. So here is the iPad. And so now all you're going to do is program your flight in. So here, let's clear this out. If you were starting from scratch, it's going to be KGNG, KTWF, and then you're going to choose procedure over here on the right. You're going to click on approach. You're going to choose the RNAV 8, and here's how you would so then you're going to choose Toxi, or sorry, not Toxi, UME as the initial approach fix, and then you're going to click add to route. Okay, so once you've done that, you can see Foreflight is going to overlay a map an approach plate over top of the map. If you don't like to have the approach plate over top of the map, which I don't really like it, if you just touch the plate with a semi-long press, you can then go view full screen. It will take you over into plates view. And so now we'll talk about briefing and approach. And I'm just going to brief it using Foreflight. And then let's get this reset the cockpit view because the briefing is going to be the same no matter what it is that you're doing, whether you're using the EFB or whether you're using Foreflight, the briefing is going to be the same. So when you're briefing a plate, the very first thing you want to do is make sure, hey, do I have the right plate? And in this case, it is Twin Falls, RNAV, runway 8. That is the one that we want. Then the next thing you're going to do is look at your ASOS, and you're going to put that in, probably I like to put it in COM2. So here, and then here's a really cool thing that you can do if you don't want to twist all this stuff in. You can go frequencies, and you can choose, so we want 135. Where is it? Oh, wrong error. Yeah, no, that's weird. It doesn't have an ASOS for us. Well, that sucks. But what we can do, so we're going to do Twin Falls approach is 126.7. So we're going to set that into our COM1. And we would actually have in this airport is non-towered, the one we're taking off at. So it is 122. Oops, wrong button. No, there we go. I'm doing this wrong. That's 126. I want that in active standby. I want to do 122.8 because we would actually have to announce our departure or our takeoff on the CTAF, and then we want to switch over. I can zoom in on this. Then we want to switch over to talk to departure. And then over here, so now we're going to go down to COM2, and we want, as you can see on the plate, the ASOS is 135025. So we're going to put that in because we're going to want that, 135025. Twist, 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 many twists later. I probably could have paused the video. Sorry about that. There we go. And then tower, if we look over here, is 118.2. So if you want to minimize the knobs you're going to have to twist while you're flying, you could put, let's go this way this time, tower in 118.2. Because what's going to happen is we're going to make an announcement on the CTAF. Then we're going to get up in the air and we're going to talk to approach. Approach is going to get us and clear us for the approach. At some point, they're going to pass us off to tower, and then we're going to talk to tower to get our clearance to land. So that is our radios set up. Now, the next thing you want to do is look here at the plan view, this area where you've got this big map here, and you can say, this is what briefing and approach would sound like if you were doing it to your co-pilot or your captain or what have you. You would say, I'm going to approach UME at the north, or coming from the north. We're going to be probably at 9,000, whatever ATC assigns us. In this case, it's going to be, you can see the arrival here is 9,500. And then from UME, we are going to fly down this way to this fix here called Widug. And at Widug, we're not going to do the procedure turn. And we need to be no lower than 6,900 feet. So you can see 6,900 feet right there for this leg right here, and no PT right here means we don't have to go around the racetrack. We're not going to do that. No racetracking for us. So let's get rid of the racetrack drawing. And then after that, oops, that's my finger, don't want to do that. Then after that, we're going to turn what's going to be a left turn at Widug, and we're going to head on this direction towards Yeager, and then ultimately down to the runway. So that's what we call the plan view. Now we're going to go down to look at the profile view. So profile view is when we're headed towards Widug, we've got to be at least 6,900 feet. Past Widug, we can descend to 3,000, where we're going to then hit the final approach fix identified by the Maltese cross. At that point, we're going to expect the autopilot to capture the glide slope, and then we're going to go on down to the runway threshold down here. Now, if we get where this is an LPV approach, so now we're talking about minimums, and it's LPV because of the equipment that is in the aircraft. This aircraft has WAAS on board. If it did not have WAAS on board, then we would be doing one of either this one or this one. But today we're doing WAAS. So minimums are 4,300 and call it 50 feet, which is roughly 200 feet above the ground. And we have 3/4 of a mile of visibility. So these minimums are very, very important to understand. First off, let's talk about visibility. So let's say that you were out here somewhere going that way before the final approach fix. If you tuned into the ASOS or AWOS or the ATIS, whichever you're getting the weather from, and the visibility was a half mile, guess what? You're going missed. You're not even missed. You can't even begin this approach. You cannot start going down the glide slope because you don't have enough visibility. Assuming that you have at least 3/4 of a mile of visibility, we can now descend to 4,000 and call it 50 feet. So 4,050 feet. And then we're going to have the runway environment in sight. If the runway environment is not in sight, then what we're going to do is we are going to fly the missed approach, which means, and the missed approach is really just this thing right here. And so the missed approach means we're going to climb to 5,000 feet, then a climbing left turn to 6,000 feet and direct back to you and me where the whole thing started. So we're going to go back to here, and ATC, in this case, before we get there, ATC is actually going to reassign us a different approach, and we're going to come in from the east side of the runway and on the ILS 26, but we'll get to that when we get to the ILS 26 plate. So that is how you brief an approach. So let's put old iPad down here. And maybe we think about going and doing some flying and getting the show on the road. So we have our approach loaded, but not activated. So that's good. And if you look and you, whoops, wrong button. If you press the FMS with your right mouse, you can scroll down and you can see all this stuff. As long as all of these waypoints here and these altitudes here match what we just briefed on the approach plate, then you know that your autopilot is correctly configured. So let's get rid of the EFB and the iPad. So in our case, that is the case. So we're correctly configured. Then we're going to fly, because we were given our clearance, which I'm not going to, that's called craft, it's clearance, it's an altitude, it's a route, it's the frequencies you talk on and so forth. We've been told to expect to fly runway heading to climb maintain 9,500. So our autopilot is set for that. It's not turned on yet. We'll do that after takeoff, but we're in heading mode. The heading bug is centered, shooting down the runway. We're going to climb at an airspeed of 70 knots to an altitude of 9,500. You can see here that field elevation is about 3,670 or so. So with that said, let's get the show on the road. Full power, release the park and brake, and off we go shooting down the runway. All right, so 172 rotates at 55 knots. Here we are at 50, 54, 55. So up we go. And at this point in time, we're going to be in IMC almost immediately. So you want to get the yellow set of wings matched up with the magenta set of wings. That's called the flight director, because according to what we programmed into our avionics,
warning,
that's
obstacle
what
ahead.
we want to fly. Warning, obstacle ahead, huh? Well, we want to watch out for that. Okay, so when should we engage autopilot? Well, I don't remember the number right off the top of my head, and I probably should. I believe there's a minimum, but I generally will engage autopilot at around 800 feet AGL. So that is going to be for us right around 4,500-ish or so. So when we get there, we'll turn the autopilot on. And now at this point in time too, by the way, you would normally, after you called your departure, you'd say, Gooding traffic, 77 Whiskey's departing IFR, runway 07. So let's turn that autopilot on. There we go. I don't know why we're like running out of
Warning,
airspeed here.
terrain
this is
ahead.
Bizarre. We might be getting some ice on the wings, perhaps. Let's have a little look. No. So why is my airplane going so slow? Oh, throttle was, there we go. We had a throttle issue. Ha! Okay, there we go.
Alert, terrain ahead.
Okay, so we're letting the autopilot take control of the aircraft. At this point in time, what you would normally do now is you're going to go back up to COM1, you're going to switch over and you're going to say, approach 77 Whiskey is with you at 4,600 climbing 9,500, at which point they're going to probably give you a squawk code to put into your transponder and so forth. And they might even give you a heading change. So in this case, they might say 77 Whiskey, turn right heading 140, climb maintain 9,500. So you would turn right to 140 and you would say, so 77 Whiskey, right 140, climb maintain 9,500. And once you've done that, you kind of have some free time on your hands because you're not looking for any more clearances or what have you. But in this case, it's such a short hop that the ATC is going to come back to us almost immediately and say something to the effect of 77 Whiskey, proceed direct UME. So you can see that UME is highlighted in our flight plan. So all I need to do is hit direct, enter, enter, to reset the direct and then put it in nav mode. And now our autopilot has switched to GPS mode here on the PFD. We're in GPS mode. There's our little boxes and we're still climbing. That's why the boxes are above us. And now we're headed towards that first waypoint. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to probably leave the screen like this because we don't really need to look out the window for the rest of this flight because there's, as you can see, there ain't nothing to see out there. Just a whole lot of nothing. Okay, so that's it checked up. Let's recenter that up. Okay, so you can see here that UME is 15 miles away. And you can also see the same thing here on the PFD. It's 15 miles away. And you can see here we have about 10 minutes at our current ground speed to get there. Ground speed of 84 knots. And you can configure, if you use your menu over here, if your settings don't say this, you can configure. You would have to get rid of the flight plan, then you hit menu and you go into map settings and blah, blah, blah. You can set it up so that these numbers are here. But we've got 10 minutes till we get to that waypoint. And we're at 6,300, climbing at around, I'm seeing if I'm just lean it out, if I can get a little bit more RPM here, because we're starting with about 2420 is all we're going to get. So that helped our rate of climb a little bit. So we have more than enough time to get to 9,500 feet is really what I was trying to explain. So what I'll do is, there's not a whole lot going on here. I'm just going to pause the video until we get to our cruise altitude, and then we will come back and say what we're going to do next. All right, so we're not quite at 9,500 yet, but I want to use this time to turn Foreflight back on and put us over to the plates view. And I want to talk a little bit more about minimums. So that's not the plate that we want. So let's do this, show plate on screen. And then we're going to say go to full screen. Okay. So one of the things that my student was, it was a little bit confusing to him because he's new into this process, is understanding the difference between an LPV minimums, which is a DA, and you can see that right here, DA, decision altitude. And then over here you've got LNAV with an MDA. What's the difference? I think we've got enough time for me to explain this difference to you. So this is what we're flying right here, LPV. So it is a precision-like approach. It's much like an ILS, but it's not ground-based equipment that we're getting our information from. It's satellites. I believe it's 5 satellites. So in this minimums here, we can go down to a decision altitude of 4,349 feet. When we get to that altitude, if we do not have the runway environment in sight, assuming that we're on the glide slope, then we need to go missed. And in reality, the plane is momentarily going to go below 4,349 feet because, we've got gravity and momentum and the nose is pointed down. It's just not like you can instantly level out when you get to minimums. And that's perfectly legal. On the other hand, if you are flying a non-precision approach, an LNAV approach, you'll notice that it says MDA, and that stands for minimum descent altitude. You cannot legally go below 4,560 feet. And that brings into play this thing right here called the VDP. This has nothing to do with a precision or precision-like approach, but it's very, very important in a non-precision approach. Because let's assume that when you get to this point right here, that you are at 4,560 feet. You might get to that altitude, but still not have the runway environment in sight. Maybe you're back here or, you're whatever. It could be anywhere kind of out in this area. When you get to the VDP, it's kind of like, I like to call it a yield sign. If you don't have the runway environment in sight, odds are, like let's say that you go past, odds are, even if you saw you're here and you had the runway environment in sight, you would have to really destabilize the aircraft to get it down in time to land and stop before you run out of runway. So is it legal to go past the VDP? Yeah, it's legal. You can go past. And if you're here and your runway is long enough, you can decide, you know what, hey, I'm just going to go for it anyway. I'm going to go visual now because I have the runway environment in sight, and I'm going to land my plane. Maybe you're in a plane that has really, really steep flaps or whatever it is. You just think you have more than enough space to get it down on the ground and stop it before the end of the runway. If, on the other hand, you're flying into an airport you've never been to before, you looked at the plate, you know how long the runway is, but you still want to err on the side of caution. When you get to the VDP, that's when you're going to decide to go missed and do the procedures, which we're going to do here in a little while, to fly the missed approach. So that is a very, very fast summary of the difference between an MDA, minimum descent altitude, cannot go below it, and a DA, a decision altitude, am I going to go missed or not? That is the difference between those two altitudes. So let's get rid of that. Okay, so now we are at
destination ASOS is 135.025.
And there is Foreflight telling us we should listen to COM 2. See if we get anything out of that. I think the volume. All right, I don't know if you heard that because I kept the volume fairly low, but it said visibility a half a mile. Uh-oh. Remember how I said that if you are approaching the final approach fix and the visibility is less than, in our case, 3/4 of a mile, you can't even begin to do the approach. Now we're going to break that rule for the purposes of this lesson because I don't feel like mucking around with the weather any more than I already have. So we're going to pretend it was 3/4 of a mile. But just so you know, when that happens, you would already have to say to approach that you need to go to your alternate, and maybe they're going to give you your next clearance or what have you for you to get there. But we're just going to fly ahead anyway. So let's see. Let's check in on our situational awareness. What I do is I look here. I'm UME. That's where I'm going. Okay, UME. Great. I'm at 9,500. I'm supposed to be at 9,500. I am at 9,500. Fabulous. My RPM is looking good. My mixture is where I want it to be. My oil pressure, my oil temps are looking good. My fuel on board is looking good. So situational, and the top of descent is coming up. So now we'll just assume that we heard this call from approach, and it says something to the effect of 77 Whiskey, you are cleared for the RNAV GPS runway 8. Great, I'm cleared. What that means is I can now fly the approach as it is published on the approach plate. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that you have your approach activated. In this case, it is already activated because UME is already highlighted. Then you're going to want to hit approach mode. You're going to want to spin your altitude down and put it in VNAV. I'm going to unpack all of that in here in just a second. So you're going to want to spin the altitude bug down to the altitude of the final approach fix. So to be clear, that is this number right here, 6,000 at Jaeger. Because what this means is VNAV, when we get to the top of descent, you're going to hear vertical track here in a minute, or you may not because the volume might be too low. But what that means is the aircraft's computer system has calculated that this is going to be our top of descent, and it is going to cause us to fly, or to descend rather, down to 6,000 feet by the time we get to the final approach fix. So when that happens, and you can see VPath is now turned green, and here we are outside. We are flying on top of the clouds, pretty cool. Okay, so VNAV is now engaged, and you can see that the aircraft has now begun a descent, and it will continue to descend down to 6,000 feet, no lower. But at that point in time, if not before that point in time, because we are in approach mode, which is the button you always push when you've been cleared for an approach, if you don't put the avionics in approach mode, it's never going to capture the glide slope. It's never going to begin the descent. But at some point, probably outside of the final approach fix, you're going to see GP turn green, and it's going to replace VPath. So all you need to be doing in the meantime is, first of all, maintaining situational awareness. Second of all, making sure you don't miss any radio calls. And then third of all, because a 172 does not have an auto throttle, you're going to be managing your power so that you're going at whatever speed you're comfortable to go at. So today we're so far at 2,500 RPM, and we're doing 107 knots. It's a calm day. There's not a lot of turbulence, so I'm not particularly worried about going slower than this just yet. This stuff right here, this magenta section, is telling us that this is VPath. So this is kind of like the vertical guidance of a glide path, and that's going to be this gray one up here. That'll come into play later. So it's telling us that we are essentially on the VPath glide slope, and the vertical navigation is telling us that we need to be descending by this. You can kind of cover it up here, but this little purple one at 500 feet per minute. So if you didn't have an autopilot, you would want your rate of descent to match whatever this little magenta arrow is, and you'd want this magenta arrow to be centered here. If it was up here, that would mean you're descending too quickly. If it was down here, that would mean you're not descending quickly enough. So now we're coming up to YDUG, where we're going to turn left to a new heading, and we're going to descend. Once we've passed UME, we're going to descend to 6,900. Now, good old VNAV, this button right here, and it's shown here, is going to do all of this for us, which really significantly decreases the pilot workload. It's going to make sure that when we pass over YDUG, however you want to say it, that we're not any lower than 6,900 feet. If you have questions on what you've heard so far, please do put those down in the comments. And also, if you have an approach at one of your local airports that you'd like to fly, go ahead and put that information in the comments, and I will do a lesson, or I'll consider doing a lesson. Obviously, I might get too many comments and too many lessons for me to do, but I might randomly pick one. Now, the other thing I wanted to let you guys know while we have a little bit of time on our hands here is if you are doing real world flight training, and maybe this is the first one of my videos that you've ever watched, what you may not know about me is I was able to earn 7 different pilot ratings. Basically, I was a private pilot from Canada a long time ago. I moved to the US. I got 7 different ratings in 91 days. And that's kind of what blew up my YouTube channel and made it so popular. And I spent only $47,000 doing that. And a lot of people were really surprised that you could go that fast and you could get flight training for so much less than what is the conventional thinking. So if you'd like to learn how to find a flight school near you, on my website, flywithtrent.com, and there will be a link down in the description, I have a guide that I created called the Guide to Accelerated Flight Training. It is my most popular guide by a long shot, and you'll be able, if you look under the products tab, and again, there will just be a link down in the description. It teaches you everything that I learned during that 91-day sprint about what makes a really great flight school to support your goal of accelerated flight training. Here we are now turning left, versus the things you need to watch out for in flight schools that might not support your goal of accelerated flight training. All right, so that's the end of that commercial. Where are we at? So now we're turning left. We're just passing over Woodug, and look at that. We're right at 6,900 feet, right as we passed over it. Now we're headed towards Yeager, the final approach fix. And we've got a little bit of work to do before we get there. So we have 5.5 miles, lots of time. It's going to take about 2 minutes and 25 seconds for us to get there. The two things that you would want to be doing during this point in time, number one, you're probably going to get passed over to tower somewhere around now. So departure would say, or approach rather, would say something to the effect of 77 Whiskey, contact tower 118.2. Now you can see we've got 118.2 already programmed in. So we're going to click this button here, then we're going to click this button, and now we're going to click on to Mic COM 2. I'm going to turn off COM 1 in a real airplane. When you hit Mic COM 2, it switches them both and you don't have to turn that off. And your radio call would be Tower 77 Whiskey is with you. Tower is going to come back and say 77 Whiskey, you are cleared to land runway 08. Only Tower can give you clearance to land. So here comes the glide slope, this gray diamond that you can see on the PFD right here. Let me zoom, well, the editor will zoom in on the PFD. So when this comes down and gets to the point where this magenta arrow is, that means we'll have captured the glide slope. So what do you need to do before you get there? Well, number one, you need to do your gumps. So gas, undercarriage, mixture, going full rich. Prop, if you had a constant speed prop, you'd push the lever all the way in, so you'd have the engine RPM at the highest. And then seatbelts and switches, you'd make sure you have your landing light on, which we do. The next thing you're going to do when you're about a mile, so we have a little bit of time, about a mile away from the final approach fix, is you need to configure the aircraft to land, for a stabilized approach. Now, according to the FAA, a stabilized approach means that you're established laterally on the localizer or on your GPS track. It means that you are on speed, so we need to start slowing the plane down a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and throw those flaps in. So you have your flaps set, you have your speed set, you're established laterally, you're established, there we go, we've just captured the glide slope. You can see here GP has turned green, even though we're not at the final approach fix yet, but that's very normal for that to happen, especially if you're a tiny bit above the altitude where you would be normally intercepting the final approach fix. So anyway, you want your approach to be stabilized. You can see here our speed is decreasing because we are, those flaps added some drag. So we are going to just manage our power to keep our speed. And there's our diamond, now pink, for our glide slope, which we are, the autopilot is flying, and we're still gaining a little bit of speed. So I'm just easing back on the engine RPM just a little bit so that you have a stabilized approach down to the point where you could see the runway, which you can see we cannot see that runway just yet. And so the runway, so the next fix is Zosel, which is 1.6 miles ahead of us. And that's on the approach plate that we were looking at earlier. And we're supposed to be 5,100 feet at Zosel. So we're at 5,500 right now. Everything is looking good. Our situational awareness is good. Our engine parameters are good. We've been cleared to land. Life is just peachy keen, even though we cannot see a damn thing out the window. So at this point in time, we just kind of keep on waiting and paying attention to what the aircraft is doing, because the last thing that you want to have happen when you are in the clouds like this is to lose situational awareness and fall behind the
3 mile
aircraft.
final runway 08.
And there is our 3-mile final. That little notification came from, I don't know if you guys heard that, you probably did. That's from Foreflight. It prompts you with things like that, which is one of the reasons, one of the many, many reasons why I'm such a big fan. So at this point in time, we can do a couple things. We can talk about going missed and setting up the aircraft. So let's look at the missed approach procedure, which is up here. Climb 5,000, then left turn to 6,000. So one thing that we could do is we can center up our heading bug just in case when we go missed, if ATC was to give us vectors instead of the published missed, all we'd need to do is put it into heading mode and then turn to whatever heading they gave us. And then the next thing we can do is we can bug the 5,000 because again,
500.
You can see here that it's climb to 5,000, then climbing left turn to 6,000. So now we're getting close. Let's have a look here at the weather. And we're getting pretty close to minimums because minimums again are 4,350 feet. So I'm going to just leave. We might see a runway environment. It looks like, here, maybe we get to there. We can see the altitude. We're at 4,460. Don't really have great runway environment in sight, but behind that compass, which is blocking our view, there is the runway environment. But we're going to go missed anyway. So 4350, we should hear, we missed it. So all we're going to do to go missed, if you had a toga button, you would hit the toga button, which in this case, that didn't work. So power up, pitch up, okay? And if you don't have a toga button, you can put it in heading mode, keep an eye on the plane, keep things going well, pull those flaps up, and then say to ATC, ATC, this is 77 Whiskey, we are going missed on the RNAV 8. So then you could turn your flight level change back on, turn your autopilot back on, and now we want to climb to 5,000, and then we're going to go left to UME. And we can, in this case, we can probably put it right back in GPS mode. I didn't seem to want to do that when I clicked on it, so we're going to do it manually. So we've got full power, we've got our flaps up, mixture's rich, we're getting all the horsepower we can get. We're climbing it, there's 5,000. So now we're going to start our left turn. And you can see here on the MFD, that little line there, we're going to basically turn that until it's kind of more or less lined up, and then we're going to go to 6,000 feet. Oops. And we're going to add flight level change, and we're going to set our climb speed of, say, 76. And now we can put it in nav mode, and there we go. And we hit, you can see here on the MFD UMEs there, see how it's doing that right turn? We'll just stop that by doing a direct enter. That recenters us. And now it's just going to turn back left again. And in Microsoft Flight Sim, the autopilot has been a little buggy lately. It's kind of like gone back past the heading, and it sort of swerves around. So I'm going to just give it a little help there, turn it off for a quick second, because otherwise it's been kind of janky. It starts swerving left, right, left, right, left, right. So at this point in time, things are looking pretty good. We are headed towards the fix that we need to put us into the hold. And we're not going to bother flying the hold today because that'll make this lesson like forever long. So at this point in time, approach says to us, hey guys, what do you want to do? We've got a much clearer, there's less fog at the east end of the runway, and we think you can get down. Do you guys want to fly the ILS 26? And we say, sure, let's do the ILS 26. Great, you can expect the ILS 26 via Toxie. So we're going to program that in. We're going to go over to proc. We're going to scroll on down to select approach, and we're going to take the ILS 26, enter, and we're going to do it via Toxie, enter, and we won't worry about the minimums are going to be the same, and we're just going to go ahead and activate that and click enter. And so there we go. Now you can see the autopilot knows that we're going towards Toxie. We're in GPS mode. We're at 6,000 feet, And so now I'm going to pull up on the iPad, we're going to pull up that other plate. So here, let's show you how to do this. iPad, there we go. So hit procedure, choose approach, choose ILS 26, choose Toxie, add to route. And so now we're going to click on the plate and view full screen. So Toxie, which you can see we're headed, the aircraft is headed here up towards Toxie, which is up there. And then we're going to fly this DME arc thingy here, and then we'll talk about that. But what altitude do I think? So at this point in time, ATC would probably tell us to be at 7,000 feet because that's the height of the arc that needs to be flown. So 77 Whiskey, climb, maintain 7,000 feet. Great, 77 Whiskey, climb, maintain 7,000 feet. So we'll do that, turn on flight level change, and set 82 knots as our climb speed. So now we're headed to Toxie, which is great. That's the first fix on the ILS 26. And then soiree and strict and runway 26 and so forth. So like we did before, so we're going to go ahead and brief this plate. First of all, do we have the right plate? ILS runway 26. We've got the right plate. Great. ASOS 135025, 135025, but we've already listened to it. We've already been in contact with tower and with approach, so probably not going to bother listening to it again. So we don't have to, we've got our CTAF tower 118.2. So 118.2 is there. We're back, and we should have been back on COM1, by the way, not COM2. So when we went missed, we would have had to we would have had to program it back onto COM1 because that's our approach frequency right there. All right, let's have, do we get any view outside the plane yet? Nope, nothing. Okay, so then you can see here we are headed to Toxie. At Toxie, we're going to start following this thing called the DME arc at 7,000 feet, and we don't need to do a procedure turn, no PT. So that means we're just going to come in here and we're going to go that way, and we're going to get established on the ILS. Now, one other frequency that is very, very, very important is this one, the localizer frequency of 108.3, because that's this number right here, the ILS frequency. It is ground-based navigational equipment. So if you do not have let me get rid of this here. If you do not have 108.3 over here on the PFD, you can see ITWF. It says ILS for Twin Falls. If that's not in the active, when you try to arm approach mode, it ain't gonna work. So that is one of those things that you need to be super careful about. If you're shooting an ILS approach and you're hitting approach and you're not seeing the glide slope letters GS show up here and the localizer LOC show up there, the issue is you're not talking to the right frequency with your nav1. So super duper important that you make that happen. All right, so here we are. We are just getting close to the fixed Toxie. You can see the GPS is now turning us, and it's turning us so that we are going to start flying this DME arc here, which you saw on the approach plate. Now, DME arcs are not super duper common these days. At least there's not too many around where I do a lot of my flying. Now you can fly them in two ways. The easy way is what we're going to do today, is just letting the GPS fly the arc for you. But back in the old days, they were called a DME arc because what you would do is you would tune in the VOR into one of your navs like we have done. Your DME, your distance measuring equipment, would tell you how far away you were. Now in this case, you can see here that the DME is 13 DME. That means we would be 13 nautical miles away from the VOR. And so in the quote unquote olden days, you would have your autopilot, or if you were hand flying, you would have somewhere in your avionics where you could see the 13, the DME, and you would be in green needles instead of magenta line, and it's called the turn, twist, turn, twist, turn, twist. So basically every time that you intercepted one of the radials from that VOR, let's say the, whatever number radial, you would then turn your heading 10 degrees, and then you would twist your course ahead to the next. So if you were at the radial 250, you would either go to 240 or you would go to 260, depending on whatever direction you were heading, and then you would fly and intercept the next radial, and then you would twist this another 10 degrees, and you would fly, and then you would turn to the next 10-degree radial. So you basically would be trying to intercept every radial from the VOR at a distance from the VOR of 13, and that would essentially fly you around this arc. But unless, you don't really have to do that anymore. If you have an aircraft that's equipped with GPS, which pretty much all of them are, you could do it one of two ways. You could do it the way we're doing it, just literally let the GPS and the autopilot do it. Or you could, it's a little expression I say called fly pad the line. And that's something that a little wordplay there that I invented with my students, and they all tell me I should get T-shirts printed that say "Fly Pad the Line." And so if you think that I should do that, leave a comment below. Maybe I'll get them made. But basically, it means fly the line on your iPad. So you could literally just put your aircraft in heading mode or hand fly it, and just make sure that your little airplane, which you can see right here, stays on the arc. And you could literally just, like I say, fly pad the line, and that would be another way that you could fly the DME arc. If you didn't have a DME and for whatever reason your GPS wasn't working, you could make sure that you could stay on the right place where you're supposed to be by doing that. All right, so we're going to pick up the sim rate here just a little bit. 3 clicks. Get around this arc a little sooner. Oh, that's probably going to make us do wobbly, 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 but that's okay. Hopefully it won't get too crazy. I better slow it down. It's getting too wobbly. So we'll go back to the regular sim rate and tell you what, I'll just pause the video and come back when we're getting close to Sori, the next waypoint. Oh, and before we get to Sori, probably somewhere around now, if they hadn't already done so, you're going to get a call from ATC that's going to say this is going to clear you for the approach. So that would sound like, approach this 77 Whiskey, you're cleared for the ILS runway 26. And they would have said, via Toxie. If we were cleared out here, if we were somewhere here, they would say via Sori. So remember, you need to hit approach mode #1. And if you're going to use VNAV, go back and look up, and it's 5900 is where we need to be for the final approach fix. So now you could turn this down to 5900 and hit VNAV. Whoops. VNAV. So now we've got VNAV armed. So that's going to take us, that'll calculate our top of descent, which you can see on the MFD right there, is right at Sori. That's when the VNAV is going to start descending us down to the 5,900 feet that we need to capture the glide slope and be established on the localizer. And when that happens, these letters will be green and they'll be here. These letters will be green and they'll be there. And then we will be established on the localizer. So for those of you who don't have Foreflight, if you want to be able to do this in EFB, make sure you choose runway 26 and then choose your approach ILS 26. And in our case, it was via Toxie, change procedure, and then you'll be able to make sure that you've got your EFB looking right like this. I'm going to switch back to Foreflight because that's what we're spending most of our time talking about, and I think most of you real world pilots are going to be using Foreflight as opposed to the built-in EFB. And by the way, if you're wondering how you get your little airplane to show up on Foreflight like this is, I'm going to get rid of the iPad here, but there's a free piece of software, and it is called Flight Events, and that basically connects Microsoft Flight Simulator with your Foreflight app on your iPad. All right, so we are now 1.5 miles away from Sori, 1.4. This is situational awareness. We've got a mile to go to Sori. We know we're going to be turning right at Sori. We're expecting to hit the top of descent, TOD, right there. Here's the turn starting to happen. When the TOD gets to us, that's going to turn green and move over there, and those triangles, those magenta, there we go. VPath is now armed. And so the descent's going to start happening to get us down to 5,900 feet. It's actually 5881. So says this, but on, and is it? Yeah, actually on the plate, it's also 5881. Okay, so you can see now it's switched to green needles for the localizer, which is exactly what it should have done. Obviously, we've not captured the glide slope yet, so there's no descent beyond. We're not going to go lower than 5,900 feet. And we're going to work our way now towards Strick, which is the final approach fix. And it is about almost 6 miles ahead of us. So to make sure, so we don't have a whole lot to do other than recenter your heading bug, because now you're on basically the heading for the runway and for the mist, and then pull back up your iPad or your EFB and review the mist approach. So we're going to climb to 4,700, then a climbing right turn to 7,000 on 020 heading, 020 heading, and the TWF VOR radial 349 outbound to Toxie. So that sounds like a heck of a mouthful. Now you can look here at the missed approach point. The GPS is expecting to climb to 4,700 feet, which is what it says right there, climb to 4,700. Then climbing right turn to 7,000. Okay, so, and then it says, it doesn't match it exactly, but I'm willing to bet you that the GPS will fly it correctly. Now, like I did in the, if you want to see in the, I'm not going to do it again in this video, but if you watch my previous video, and I'll put a link in the description, I show you how to basically manually fly without relying on GPS, just heading and the VOR and the radials, how to do a mist and intercept these radials and when to make these turns and so forth. Basically, you can see the mist approach here. It's go this way, turn right, intercept the 349 radial, then track that radial inbound to the hold, and then fly the hold. So that word salad basically just means climb, turn right, fly along till you intercept that radial, then track the radial into the fix, and then fly the hold. That's really all it is. But the word salad makes it sound super duper duper confusing. In this case today, we're gonna land, because this lesson is this video is getting pretty long in the tooth as it is. So let's get rid of that and let's check back in with our situational awareness. So you can see now the glide path is coming down. So that means this is going to turn green pretty quick. We're a mile away. So again, we got to do our gumps, got to bring down our airspeed, got to put in 10 degrees of flaps. Just double check our flaps. Yep, did we get our 10 degrees? Yeah, we did. There's our 10 degrees. So to configure, and so there's us at 5,900. We're just about going to intercept. We're a half a mile away from the final approach fix, Strick. And there we go. We've now captured the glide slope. And so our speed is a little lower than it should be. And you probably can't hear that beep, but that's the outer marker. Beep, 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 beep. When you're on an ILS, you tend to get those outer marker and inner marker beeps. So now really all I have, if you're still on autopilot, which we are, all you have to do at this point in time is manage your throttle, unless you have an auto throttle, and if you do, lucky you. Like the Vision Jet has an auto throttle, so you don't have to be managing throttle like I'm doing right now. And you're basically making adjustments to your RPM to make sure that you're stabilized as possible at the 90 knots approach speed. Now, my student asked me this morning, well, Trent, when I'm doing a VFR approach, I do the approach generally at 70. Why do you do an IFR approach at 90? And my answer to him, I don't know that this is in a textbook or a reg anywhere, but here's my answer. I said, well, in an IFR approach, you can't see that runway like you can in a VFR approach. So a VFR approach, you know you're going to land for sure. Oh, I'm going a little fast. But in an IFR approach, you don't know that until you get down to minimums. And so if you're going to have to climb back out doing a missed approach, wouldn't you rather have more energy in the aircraft than less? And he said, yeah. And I said, oh, that's why you fly it at 90 knots. Because when you get down there and you're low to the ground and you can't see anything, you want to climb quickly to get out of harm's way. So having more energy in the aircraft, aka more airspeed, is going to help you to make sure that you can pitch up, power up, and climb up faster than you could if you had flown the whole approach at 70 knots like you might be doing in a VFR approach. So we have some
2 mile final runway 26.
There we go, 2 mile final. So we have about 1.5 minutes to go. You can see that right here until we should be looking at a runway. So we'll just kind of keep on peeking over the dash and see when that runway comes in sight. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go visual, so we won't care what's on the instruments because we're going to be looking out the window at the runway. You're going to be going 90 knots, which is too fast to land a 172. So if you've got a really long runway, you can just pull power idle, keep it 10 degrees of flaps, and you can land the plane. The other thing you could do is, if you have a slightly shorter runway, is pull power idle,
500,
slow the aircraft to 85 knots or less, and then apply all of the rest of your flaps, and then you could land in much less of a ground roll because you've got those extra flaps helping you to slow down. So we are coming up on our minimums of 43.53. We've got about 100 feet to go. And there is our runway environment in sight right there. How cool is that? So let us reset our cockpit view. And we're going to turn the autopilot off. We're going to pull power idle. See how we're slowing down like crazy? There's 85 knots. Second degree of flaps, third degree of flaps. Bleeding airspeed, bleeding airspeed, bleeding airspeed, down to where we would normally be landing, somewhere, 55 to 60, crossing the threshold, and then holding it off, and holding it off, and holding it off, and there is our landing. All right, guys, I hope you found that supremely helpful. If you did, or you have questions, if you did, please just make a comment of some kind to get so the algorithm will show this video to more people. If you have questions about any part of this, please go ahead and put those questions down in the comments. I do read every single comment, and I reply to a whole bunch of them. And I want to thank you very much for hanging out with me for this flight lesson. Many more of these to come. So hope this was valuable, and we'll see you in the next video soon. Take care. Bye-bye.